Welcome to the 5th episode of the Ether PDF read through. In this episode, we're going over combat. So, before we dive in, I want to say that I tried to design combat to be as fluid as possible so that when you're outside of combat playing the game, exploring, solving puzzles, finding clues, whatever, all the things that you're rolling and doing in that type of gameplay shouldn't feel very different at all from playing combat. So it's designed to be like seamlessly integrated into the rest of gameplay. Another thing that's important to say at the outset is that damage and hitting in general is extremely simple. So if you like crunchy combat with like lots of rolling and lots of factors, you might not love this style of combat. That's just something I wanted to put out there. This is for like very sort of fluid, fast combat that has worked really well for me. Okay, turn order. Combat begins with the player first involved, whether they are instigating the conflict or defending against it. Turns progress clockwise around the table, following the first player. Enemy actions only come into play when players fail or partially succeed. Okay, so you walk into a room with your party, and there's a monster. The monster is immediately hostile and attacks one of you. Whoever it attacks, that player is going first. Now, let's say you walk into a room with your party and there's a monster and it's not hostile, but one of you attack it. Whoever attacks it goes first. And then turns progress clockwise around the table. If you're playing virtually, then you kind of establish some kind of table order or, combat order. The point of turns always progressing clockwise around the table is for practicality and for streamlining combat. It's especially helpful if you're playing an extended adventure and with multiple sessions. And if the players always sit in the same seat, then like every session they know when they're in combat when they're going. They're always after this certain player. It is one of those sort of meta things that you kind of just sort of accept. Um, and it can seem like it could break immersion to like always have the same order, but once you do it every time that way, it just makes sense, it flows so fluidly in my experience. And I never have to ask who's going next, and like players never have to ask me who's going next. They always know. I always know who's next. It's great. Okay, you walk into a room. One of you attacks the monster. Whoever attacks the monster goes first. And then they roll to do, whatever they want to do. And if they get a success, they're good. They do what they want to do. They hit the monster, they get the jewel, whatever it is. But if they roll partial success or a failure, there's some kind of drawback. Oftentimes, in a fight against the monster is attacking you. With a partial success, it's not as bad. With a failure, it's pretty bad. Um, but that's the only time that enemies attack. And I think it really balances out, especially with, four players against one monster. In traditional sort of turn order, you go through every player and then the monster goes. You go through every player and then the monster goes. Um, that monster is, unless it's super beefy, like this is a really imbalanced fight. So with the four players going, and then anytime there's a failure or a partial success, the monster kind of goes. It's super balanced. It's very like, especially with the partial outcome, you know, it's essentially almost 50-50, and then you have that wiggle room in the middle with the partial. So I've found that this kind of turn order is super balanced and really fun too, because you never know when the monster is going to act. Something bad will happen with every partial or failure, and that's really exciting. Okay, so we went over turn order and when enemies act. Let's talk about what a turn looks like, okay? So turn overview. Okay, you're in combat and it's your turn. Here's what it looks like. Step 1, describe what you want to do. Describe your desired action. Step 2, the GM determines, just like in a regular attribute roll, the GM determines the relevant attribute: strength, dex, constitution, intelligence, wit, or luck, and then a target number. So it's just like a regular attribute roll. And then step 3, you roll, and then you get your outcome. And then the only thing that's different is you can perform another action if you have any more action points, which is what we're getting into next here. So when it's your turn, you have 3 action points to play with, to spend per turn. There are 3 types of actions, each with a different action point cost and difficulty. So there's quick, half, and full action. 1, 2, and 3 action points, respectively. And this might seem a little counterintuitive, but quick actions are the most difficult and full actions are the easiest. So to read through these: quick action, fast and flashy but harder to pull off. Half action, balanced, takes longer and usually has an average difficulty. And then full action, you spend your whole turn on this, making it easier to succeed since you're fully focused. So the argument here is that if you wanted to do something, if you want to do something really complicated, such as tie like a very secure knot, I'll allow you to do that as a quick action if you think, like, if you have a high dex and you think you could pull it off, but I'm going to make that target number higher because you're doing it as a quick action. Now, if you say you do it as a half action or a full action, it's going to be easier, especially as a full action. If you're going to spend your whole turn, if you're going to spend all 3 action points tying the secure knot, then it's going to be an easier target number. I'm going to make it like a, I don't know, depending on the situation, let's say like an 8 or 9, you know? If you wanted to do that as a quick action, it's going to be more like a, 14, 15, of course, depending on the situation. So, of course, with like the math of how this works, there's only like 3 combinations of action types that you can do on a turn. You can do 3 quick actions, you can do 1 half and 1 quick, or you can do 1 full action. So, and that's illustrated really well here. So thank you to Rachel for that. Okay, let's think of a simple example. Let's say there's an item that you have to get in the room, but your party's fighting a monster, okay? And let's say you're closest to it, so it makes sense for you to be the one to go get it or whatever. So it's your turn. You can say, I really want to get this thing, so I'm going to spend my full action on it to have the highest chance of making sure that I get it, and to like get out of range of the monster, or whatever it is. So when you describe it that way, you kind of work together with the GM to be like, can I do this as a full action? And then, of course, with this example, yes, you can. But yeah, you kind of work together to determine what type of action you're doing. But let's say that the item isn't that important. Maybe you're losing the battle. Let's say that the monster takes priority. Let's spend a half action to attack the monster and then a quick action to get the item. So you have a higher chance of hitting the monster and doing some damage, and you have less of a chance to get the item, but you can still roll to do it as a quick action. Or you can flip it around, spending the half action getting the item, and spending the quick action to fight the monster. And then, of course, the only other option is spending the full action to fight the monster instead of the item. Let's say that you kind of communicate with your party and you say, I'm going to focus on the monster, someone else get the item, that kind of thing. Or maybe you're the only one left standing and the item is still something you need to get, but it is definitely not the priority. The priority is to deal with the monster. You're definitely going to want to spend your full action fighting the monster, unless you're running away and abandoning your party. In that case, spend the full action getting the item and get out of there. So yeah, those are very simple examples of the different ways that you can spend your turn and spend your actions, your action points. If you want to see combat in action, there is a playlist of actual play on this channel. The series is called The Temple of the Ancient Face. There's plenty of action in that, plenty of combat, so you can see how the players spend their turns and the ways that they choose to divvy up their action points. And so I recommend listening to that as well. Here I have some more examples of actions. With this table, I was very broad. So, example of a quick action, quick attack, or quick improvised action. And then half action, there's like a basic attack, or basic improvised action. Or you can spend ether, which is something we went over in a previous video. So when you're casting spells, I'll make another video on spell casting, but each of the 3 chapters correlates with action types. Okay, dealing hits. Now this is the part that might make or break it for you, but hopefully you stick around and hear me out. So attacks will always deal 1, 2, or 3 hits, depending on which action you choose. And then rolling a partial success does not lower the amount of hits that you deal. So as long as it's a partial or a success, you get to deal the hits. If you roll a failure, then you don't. But on a quick action, if you're attacking, if your intention is to attack and to hit, and you're doing a quick action, that will only ever do 1 hit. So back to the example where there's an item and then there's a monster. If you want to spend a half action getting the item, then you only have a quick action remaining. You only have 1 action point remaining to spend on hitting the monster. That attack will only do 1 hit. But if you want to spend a half action hitting the monster, that's going to do 2 hits. And then you get to spend the other action point getting the item. Or you can spend a full action to just attack the monster and potentially deal 3 hits. Of course, you got to roll a success or a partial to do the hits. So I hope that makes sense. And if it doesn't, this next page should clarify it more. So weapon effects. You might be wondering, do weapon types matter? If I have a light weapon or a heavy weapon or a medium weapon, shouldn't they have different damage ranges? And the answer is no. A light weapon can do the exact same amount of damage as a heavy weapon. It just depends on which action you choose. You can attack with a quick action with a light weapon and deal 1 hit. You can attack with a quick action with a heavy weapon and deal 1 hit. Why? Weapon type does not affect how many hits you deal. Hits are determined by the action you choose, whether you're using a light weapon, heavy weapon, or none at all. However, and this is my sort of justification of this whole mechanic, the weapon that you're using strongly influences the target number that the GM is setting. So your weapon choice and how you describe using it changes how difficult the action is. So I have 2 examples here. A dagger, which would be a light weapon, is better for a sneaky assassination, if that's what you want to do. And so the GM would give you a lower target number because a dagger is better for that, and it makes sense. But it would not be good for breaking down a door. In that case, the GM would give you a higher target number. And the other example is a warhammer is better for breaking down a door, but it would not be good for a sneaky assassination. So these are sort of inverses of each other. So with Ether in general, it's very narrative focused. It's very fiction forward. So there's a lot of trust involved with the GM and the players going both ways to prioritize the fiction, the story, over metagaming and like min-maxing and trying to win the game. So we're prioritizing story over like really gamifying and trying to win essentially. So that's why combat works like this. It's super fluid. The most you can do on one turn is 3 hits unless there's some kind of crazy situational thing. It's more interesting and fun to me to get creative with your combat descriptions rather than just have like a very strong weapon and then deal a bunch of damage every time. You know, I really wanted everyone to sort of be on the same playing field. If you have a tiny weapon and, you know, your teammate has a super heavy weapon, I want you both to feel like you're both capable of doing the same things. Now, of course, your characters are going to be different and you're going to be role playing those characters. So they're going to behave differently. But I don't want anyone to feel pigeonholed into a particular set of abilities. I don't think I said this in a previous video, but there are no classes in Aether. The equipment that you acquire is what defines your character, as well as your burden and all that. But you sort of, as you play the game, you accumulate these different things, and skills as well that define who your character is. You can play as a character who always picks up a spell book whenever they find one, or buys them at the store. And every time they level up, they take a skill in some kind of spell casting because that's what they've been doing, you know? And maybe they also have like a Runewood staff or something. Then, of course, that character is kind of like a wizard, you know? And then the same thing with like weapons. You know, the character accumulates weapons and combat skills. And then, of course, that character is a fighter. So the classes come after as sort of like an observation. In my experience, it's more fun to get immersed in the creativity, and then after that's done, kind of going back, and that's when I'm identifying and putting labels to what has happened. After a game, I can look back and be like, okay, it looks like my character is like more of like a ranger type, you know, because they did a little bit of hunting and survival stuff. So I'm gonna make a video about the game philosophy, so I can finish this tangent in that video. But you're probably wondering, what's up with taking hits? So like I said earlier, enemies only act on partial successes and failures. So that's when you're taking hits, okay? So you risk taking hits to HP and stamina first, if you have any, whenever you roll a failure or a partial success. It depends on the severity of the roll itself and the specific enemy that the GM has prepared, but generally, partial successes result in taking 1 to 2 hits, and failures result in taking 2 to 3 hits. Okay, example. Let's say you're fighting some kind of like big bat monster, okay? It's your turn. Let's say you roll a partial success. Boom. You still do what you set out to do. You hit the creature. So we're kind of getting into the GM's head right now, and I'm going to make a video on that, into how GMs kind of get their numbers. But let's say you roll a high partial. That means you did as best as you can under a full success. So let's say the bat swoops down and scratches you, you know, just you take 1 hit and that's it. But let's say you roll a very low partial. Let's say that the bat screeches in your face and you get this like pounding headache and your ears are throbbing, and you take 2 hits from that with that low partial. Now let's say that you roll a failure, and let's say you roll a high failure, so it's not a bad failure, but it's still a failure. You don't deal any hits, and the attack is going to kind of suck. So it's going to be maybe the bat creature swoops down and digs its claws into you and like cuts you really deeply. You're going to take 2 hits from that, and there's going to be some kind of other side effect that the GM has prepared for that monster. Same thing with the partial successes. There are other bad things that happen besides taking hits, depending on the monster. Now, let's say you roll a bad failure. You're going to take 3 hits from that, and there's going to be a really bad side effect. Let's say it picks you up and it tosses you down a ravine, or it slams you into the wall. You're going to take 3 hits, and something really bad is going to happen as well. Whether that's you drop something down the ravine, the monster takes something from you, or let's say that it knocks you into the wall so hard that you're kind of in and out of consciousness. And the GM may say, like, you're going to lose 2 action points on your next turn. So on your next turn, you only get to spend 1 action point. Or let's say that the monster is now focused on attacking an NPC or another, party member. As I said earlier in another video, every roll moves the narrative forward. So success is going to move the story forward in your favor. You're going to attack the monster, you're going to deal your hits, you're going to get the item, you're going to get over the obstacle. A partial success is you do the thing, but then there's some kind of drawback. So in combat, you do the thing, you attack the monster, but then you take a hit, or there's a situational disadvantage thing, some kind of drawback. And with a failure, you don't do the hit, you just get attacked, or you just get some kind of special effect on you, something bad. And that brings us to the end of the combat chapter. So there's things about combat in tabletop role-playing games that I didn't go over in the book here, because I purposely left them out because I don't use them. One example being mapping combat. I don't have any rules for that because I do theater of the mind style combat, where everything is kind of in our heads, in our imagination. And like I was saying earlier, there's a trust that goes both ways between the GM and the players, a trust that the story will be prioritized and no one's going to do something that doesn't make any sense. If it makes sense for your character to be in a particular place in the room, we're going to roll with that, Let's say during another person's turn, your character kind of wandered a few feet this way or a few feet that way. Totally fine. That totally makes sense, If, for example, you're saying that your character is like all the way on the other end of the dungeon, it's on your next turn, well, that doesn't make any sense. That we're not going to allow that. We're going to say that maybe you can spend your turn going down there. You can spend a full action, running across the dungeon to another room. You can negotiate that with the GM, but with mapping, it's all, I guess, sort of honor system. Sometimes something doesn't make sense, but it's really cool, or it should have kind of worked this way. Now, those are also times where I can be like, you know what? Let me retcon this little bit here just so that we can, because this would have happened, like, I don't like to retcon things and to double back on things that I describe as a GM, but sometimes it just makes sense to do that. It's in the nature of playing theater of the mind. Sometimes you're going to have to check in with everyone to make sure that everyone knows where they are. But in my experience, it's been really fluid and easy. Another thing that isn't mentioned in the book that's similar to mapping combat is attack distances, attack ranges. This comes down to what is described and what type of action the player chooses, as well as what chapter of spell they're choosing. So if they choose a chapter 1 spell and they want to attack someone at the very other end of the cavern, that's going to be a really hard chapter 1 spell. That target number is going to be really high, you know? But if they're spending a full action, if they're spending 3 action points, if they're casting it as a chapter 3 spell, then they're more likely to be able to do that, you know? And the target number is going to be lower. So it's all about what makes sense. If something is really crazily described and is really unbalanced or overpowerful, it's up to the GM to kind of sort of reel that back in into something that makes sense. And so the action types, the points, and the spell chapters, these are all parameters. They're guidelines. They help keep you in your lane, in terms of what you can do with your action. Another thing that's not mentioned in the book, but is something that you can do if you would like to, is the idea of passing a turn, and saving points. Whenever a new round of combat starts, whenever there's a full cycle around the table, whenever it comes back to you, you start your turn with 3 points. Every time, whenever it comes back to you, you get 3 points, unless the GM has taken away some of your points because of some kind of attack or whatever. You'll always get 3 points at the start of your turn. So let's say out of your 3 action points, you spend 1, you do a quick action, but you're not sure what else you want to do in your turn. What is available to players and GMs out there is the concept of passing your turn and saving those points for later within the round. So you do your quick action, turn goes to the next player, they spend their turn. You still have those 2 points left over. Let's say they, player number 2 does their turn, but something bad happens to them. This gets into like a more nuanced, sort of advanced version of combat. But player 1 can say, like, hey GM, while that monster is about to attack player 2, can I spend my my 2 remaining points to do a half action to try to block that attack? Or or that kind of blocking is possible in with this nuance. Or maybe player 2 spends their whole turn, and then you're like, you know what, now I know what I wanted, because maybe something happened with player 2 that opened up a new possibility. So you're like, okay, well, before the next player goes, can I spend my 2 remaining points and do something else? But with this version of combat, it's important that at the end of the round, you lose those 2 leftover points. So if you save your points and you don't use them, you don't start the next round with double the points. You always start your turn with 3 points. So that's the idea of saving points, and that is not something you have to do. I just thought that was important to mention, because I know that some of you will wonder about that, like, what if I don't want to spend all my points right now? You can save them and then use them later within the round. So with that, I think I will say that the combat video is over, and I'm going to pull up the itch page. Okay, thank you for watching episode 5 of the Aether PDF read through. You can download the PDF for free on the itch page, linked in the description. Physical copies are available. Paperback copies are available for a limited time. So at the time of this video being recorded, I have about, I think, like around 15 copies. So email me at etherttrpg@gmail.com if you're interested in getting one of those. We can talk about payment and shipping. I don't have like a store for that right now. It's only the itch page for the PDF that you can get for free. But yeah, if I set up a store, it would cost money for me to maintain the store, and then it wouldn't be worth it. So just email me if you want a book. And if enough people email me, we'll order another batch of books, and then we can get those rolling out to you. Oh, and if you want to listen to some actual play of Aether, please check out the Temple of the Ancient Face playlist that is also on this channel. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye. Bye.